How do you go back? Hey friends, welcome back to week 14 already, week 14 of Rotoworld's DFS Building Block Show. I am John Daigle, joined as always, not in studio today, but in lower heaven, Ian Hartitz. How are you doing, man?
Doing great, John. I will be live at the Cowboys-Bears game tonight, so I'm sorry I couldn't join you, but it is for a good excuse, in my opinion.
Good excuse. I know you got boots on the ground. You are ready to scope it out in person, and that's why I want to jump into that game first, because you're there, you're live. So if anyone has any idea who to captain and who to play before we get into the main slate, it's you. So go ahead, lead us off. Talk about this Thursday night NFC Showdown we have, which is important for both teams as they surge towards the playoffs.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my guy Cordell Patterson as a good cost-saving play. But in all seriousness, look, these are two offenses that kind of have tough matchups here. I mean, neither the Cowboys nor the Bears have had the elite defense we kind of expected them to be this year, particularly on the Bears side of the ball. But they're still pretty good secondaries. They still got some pass rush juice, and they're still pretty good against the run. So it's not an easy matchup on either side of the ball, especially in the Chicago, weather. Cowboys usually playing in the Dome. But with that said, I think I'm most inclined to keep going at this Cowboys passing game because since their Week 8 bye, it has no longer just been the Amari Cooper show. It's been the Cooper, Michael Gallup, and Randall Cobb show. Cooper's the PPR wide receiver 15 in the last 5 games. Gallup's the wide receiver 16. The wide receiver 17, and Cobb is the wide receiver 16. So they're literally right next to each other with the production. I mean, John, it's kind of tough to tell like which one could potentially pop off, but I don't mind putting multiple of these guys in the same lineup with Dak and just kind of hoping that they get the better of this Bears secondary.
I like on the other side of the ball, I do believe in the Cowboys offense, don't get me wrong, but I still like Anthony Miller a lot in this matchup. Taylor Gabriel in concussion protocol, Ben Broniker in concussion protocol, and so that means Anthony Miller will once again play in the slot and be featured heavily there. Anthony Miller, his last 3 games in particular, 33 targets. And then you look at what Cole Beasley did against Jordan Lewis in the slot just last week, over 100 yards and a touchdown. So Anthony Miller, I think, will continue leading this Bears passing game as a sturdy option. Yes, Allen Robinson's still trustworthy as well, but I definitely don't mind captaining Anthony Miller if you need to save salary somewhere.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Anthony Miller scored 7 touchdowns as a rookie. It's not like this guy's just been popping up with newfound opportunity. He's always been a good player since entering the league, and he did all that as a rookie with a bum shoulder as well. Only Robert Woods, Leonard Fournette, and Mike Williams have more targets than Miller without a touchdown this season. So, sometimes that when you hope for the touchdown regression, you got to kind of wonder, like, okay, is this guy really due for touchdowns, or is he just maybe not that good of a player? But I think, along with Mike Williams, like Anthony Miller truly is one of these good wide receivers that we will see his, scoring opportunities to continue to increase as long as Gabriel remains sidelined.
Any other options, though, you were leaning towards, since there are quite a few pieces in this matchup?
I think David Montgomery, I know he hasn't been the guy that everyone kind of envisioned. He's only had 3 carries of 15-plus yards this season. His elusive rating and kind of ability to break tackles hasn't been anything close to, what was being hyped in the offseason. Best PFF running back ever in broken tackles was all over Bears Twitter all during August. But with that said, he's getting at least 15 touches pretty much every single game. Tariq Cohen, he's involved. He gets his targets, but they're still making sure to get Montgomery 15 to 20, usually carries. And against this Cowboys defense that I think is a little bit stronger against the pass and the run. We've seen teams have a little bit of success, particularly the Bills last week when they really started trying to grind things out. There is a scenario where the Bears, I think, are able to get out in front and then hand the ball to Montgomery. If he happens to fall into the end zone a couple of times, you might just have yourself the captain of the day.
There are a lot of pieces in this matchup. I believe it's going to be a good one. And then Zeke, obviously, with Tony Pollard questionable for this game. Zeke, as you mentioned, you do like the passing game, but do you see Zeke's passing game work continuing? Because last week, remember, he even played over Tony Pollard in the receiving game, got 10 targets as they were coming from behind. Do you see him getting that amount of targets even if Pollard plays this game?
Potentially, and the one thing that kind of makes me, like normally this season I've been hesitant assuming that Zeke's going to get the targets. He's had pretty extreme career splits with Jason Witten in and out of the lineup. I mean, they just have different check down options this year in addition to Zeke than they did last year when he was getting all those targets per game. But I was reading Hayden Wink's awesome fantasy forecast column on this Cowboys-Bears matchup, and one thing he noted was that, Jerry Jones has, come out and said that and notice that Zeke's touches per game are way down this year compared to the last few years. I think we both know that that's not the reason why the Cowboys are 6-6, but Jerry and Jason Garrett might not realize that. So this could be a scenario where we just see the Cowboys force feed Zeke the ball. And, Yeah, I mean, he's and like you said, I don't think Pollard is really limited Zeke much this season anyway. He's only playing like 10 or 15 snaps at most in these weeks. But if you're taking Pollard out of the equation, or if he's just only going to be active as kind of an if emergency strikes type back, yeah, I think we could see Zeke have another really big target share game.
All right, well, everyone is here for the Week 14 main slate, so we will head that way, and it's an interesting one for sure. We are struggling for salaries, for savings on this slate. So we'll go through and we'll mention some cheap options just in case you do want to pay up at running back and or quarterback. We'll discuss mediocre salary plays just in case you think a median priced lineup of middling guys is the best way to go. So Ian, why don't you go ahead and get started on this Week 14 main slate?
The single wildest thing I saw in the pricing when I've been looking at it so far this week is Kyler freaking Murray is priced behind Duck freaking Hodges. Like, look, there's nothing wrong with Duck. I agree he's an upgrade from Mason Rudolph, but this guy has thrown 20 and 21 passes in his 2 starts this season. I mean, the fact that we have Kyler Murray, who's the QB6 on the season, priced as the QB16, just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I realize the Pittsburgh defense is very good at all 3 levels, and TJ Watt's probably going to spend a good amount of the afternoon in that Cardinals backfield. But again, if we have a rushing quarterback like this, we don't need to worry about the defensive matchups that much. And I'm fine with downgrading him a little bit, but QB6 to QB16 is just insane to me. So only Lamar Jackson is averaging more rushing yards per game than Kyler. The hamstring injury last year was a little bit of an issue. I'm sorry, not last year, last week. A little bit of an issue we thought going in. With that said, I mean, Kyler was able to get loose on a read option, score about a 15-yard touchdown. Did not look like any slower, any more hindered than usual. He looked like the usual freak athlete that we've come to grow and love. And with that, it's just hard for me to get off his floor. He's been great all season. Both Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald are affordable stacking partners. I think Kirk's low 5,000s, Fitzgerald's high 4,000. So it's an easy stack. I think you can throw Kirk and Kyler into cash lineups, and they will far from sink it, and you got upside with them too.
As we move along here, by the way, there's just so much going on in front of me. We have multiple computers. We had a little bit of a technical error. We're also still taking questions on YouTube and Twitch. If you get them in, we'll be answering along the way about this slate. But for me, I'm going back to Lamar Jackson. And I would say it's an even tougher matchup than his previous matchup against the Niners. The way the Bills can contain him is actually just much better, as they don't allow him to run on the outside. Even so, it's more of a salary argument for me. Last week, on DraftKings in particular, Lamar Jackson was $7K, which was that was the first time all season long he was under 30% rostered in cash games. He's back up to 74, but given his skill set, it's a guy that really sites should force you to make a choice on. And to me, 7,400, given everything he can do and how high his floor is not an option, even in this matchup. And also remember, the Bills are more susceptible to the run, which is why Mark Ingram isn't a bad play this week as well. We may get there along the way. But I still like Lamar Jackson for cash games, if only the floor.
Yeah, and going to my GPP play, I'm with you to pay up a little bit. Patrick Mahomes, look, the Patriots are incredible. I know this, you know this. With that said, I think we've realized that maybe this isn't, one of the most elite defenses we've ever seen, and maybe they just had a really easy first 8 weeks of the season, because we saw Lamar Jackson be the QB3 versus the Patriots, and last week Deshaun Watson was the QB1. Last season, Mahomes threw for 352 yards and 4 touchdowns, and then 295 yards and 3 touchdowns in his 2 games against the Patriots. I agree with you that Lamar is probably the better, safer play in cash. But, with Lamar, Aaron Rodgers, and Mahomes up there, I think Mahomes is going to be kind of the odd man out, because everyone's still afraid of these Patriots matchup. So people are scared off by it. Mahomes, I know back-to-back, pretty bad performances for him, with not going over 200 yards is wild for him. Usually we're disappointed if he doesn't go over 300 yards, let alone 200. But I think, we got to continue to go back to Mahomes. We know what his ceiling is. We've seen it plenty of times. Yes, the matchup's tough, but again, we've now learned in recent weeks that the matchup is not beatable. So I also think Tyreek and Kelsey are go a little bit under-owned. So if you want to fire up that Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey stack, man, that's got some tournament winning upside.
And it's a good matchup as well. And another good matchup I'll be targeting in tournaments. I know Sam Darnold ranks higher, not only at the toolkit on on rotoworld.com/DFS, but Sam Darnold is ranking higher across the industry and projections. However, I still like Ryan Fitzpatrick on the other side of the ball. And the Jets already struggled against opposing quarterbacks and receivers, right? We know that. However, the Jets are also missing 3 of their top 5 corners in this particular matchup. And more importantly, missing Jamal Adams, who is one of the few difference makers in the entire league at the safety position. He leads from the safety position the entire Jets defense and sacks, blitzes, and pressures. Has 32 more blitzes in Greg Williams' attacking scheme than any other player on the Jets defense. So if those 3 players, Jamal Adams in particular, are missing, I think both Ryan Fitzpatrick and Devontae Parker, and perhaps even Gesicki and Patrick Laird can all be involved in what is a great matchup in which you have to attack the Jets over the top because you just can't run against them.
It's a sneaky shootout potential in the Jets Dolphins. It feels so icky to even think that, but there are guys on both sides of the ball I like. I'm with you.
We'll continue to get those questions in on YouTube and Twitch, and we'll answer them as we move along here. But Ian, go ahead and kick us off at the running back position.
My cash game running back of the week is Devonta Freeman, only 5,400 on DraftKings. There's a floor here for Freeman. It's actually pretty high, and it's really good with the pass game. I know Hooper could come back, but even when Hooper was playing, they were making sure to get Freeman pretty involved in the pass game. This season, only Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, and Leonard Fournette have more games with at least 3 receptions than Freeman. You know, he's not splitting out wide. He's not having these outrageous games receiving yards, but at only 5,400, he gives you a nice pass game floor where even if he doesn't happen to find the end zone, you know, he's not going to sink your lineup. And I think the chances of him finding the end zone are as good as ever this week because the Panthers have allowed at least twice as many rushing touchdowns than 25 other defenses this season. I mean, it's seriously like just this massive gap between them and everyone else in terms of this running back success against them. So, again, we got the matchup, we got the receiving floor, and finally, Freeman is no longer being this 50-50 back that we saw for the first half of the season when Ito Smith was there. Consistently throughout his tenure in Atlanta, if they haven't felt comfortable with the backup RB2, when there's been an injury, they've usually given Freeman and the past Tevin Coleman a featured role. And that's exactly what we saw last week with them declining to give Brian Hill too many touches. Freeman has 6-7% snap rate, 22 combined carries and targets. He's a lead RB in an offense that I know hasn't played very well this season, but with the awesome matchup on the ground, I'm confident in Freeman in cash lineups.
Freeman is a terrific one, if only for the salary and the matchups you talked about. Another one I really like is Alvin Kamara for the Saints. And, you know, you're never really worried about Kamara. The matchup is a tougher one against the 49ers defense. But at the same time, Kamara's targets have still been there since Week 10, and that's with Jared Cook still being factored for 6.5 targets in that game in that span. So Kamara should, back at home now, which the Saints have performed much better at home this year, Kamara should be an important factor. And as we talked about, his touches in the past 3 games, or his targets, in the past 3 games in particular, 10, 9, and 8. So he's definitely going to be involved. He's clearly won the role over Latavius Murray, despite the fact that they may want to get him involved more, but it's still, they just sneakily get Taysom Hill involved even more than Latavius Murray. So I have no fears in, at a reduced salary point, going to Kamara whatsoever.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people just worried about this matchup for Kamara, but like we got to realize he's not your everyday running back. He catches so many passes that you just don't need to worry about it as much, particularly considering, you know, the 49ers have been kind of a run funnel defense. They're awesome against everything, but way more so against kind of wide receivers in the passing game. My GPP running back of the week is Mr. Joe Mixon at only 5,800. Bengals are terrible. We know this. With Dalton, they're a little bit less terrible, but Mixon's getting fed, and guess what? He's been pretty dang good, even when Ryan Finley was under center. He has at least 15 touches in all 4 games since the Bengals' Week 9 bye. He's been the PPR RB9, RB27, and most recently RB16 in those stretches. And the good news is, like, he's been trending towards actually finally being the lead back. It was a really annoying, like 50-50 to 60-40 snap situation between him and Giovanni Bernard in the first half of the season. But last week we actually saw Mixon post a season-best 79% snap rate, dominated usage over Bernard. I think a little bit of that was due to game script. That's why I'm not, super confident firing up Mixon and cash. But with that said, I mean, the Browns 24th and adjusted line yards allowed per rush. No Myles Garrett's obviously huge. There's a ceiling here with Joe Mixon where he could be the lead back in a not as terrible offense, and God forbid they decide to throw him the ball a little bit more than they have this season. And, he could be a real nice piece in the tournament lineup.
You talked about his role change, and yes, he did play a season high in snaps last week, but he also 95% of the running back carries over Gio Bernard, which hasn't been the case all year, and then also 4 of 6 of their running back targets. So it was kind of a role change, instilling him back into the offense as they instilled Andy Dalton back into the offense. So if that continues, I even teetered with him in cash, honestly. It obviously depends if we get Darwin Thompson or Madison or any of these values, but there was a time where I was playing around with him cash, and that could very well happen depending on how the rest of the slate shakes out. But for me, my play is, as I jump over to it trying to work 2 computers now, is Melvin Gordon. Because Melvin Gordon is now in a terrific matchup against the Jaguars defense. And yes, he hasn't performed as well personally as we have hoped for, but the fact is Melvin Gordon is still getting most of the carries over Austin Eckler. You just look at his last 4 games, 20 carries, 22 carries, 14, and then 20. And in that span still, the past 2 weeks in particular, 5 targets and 3 targets. So he easily projects for over 20 touches in this game. And as we know, Carolina gets all the credit or discredit for being the worst rushing defense in the league, but the Jaguars are up there. The Jaguars are still allowing top 5 in fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. So if we can depend on a 20-touch running back at a very good salary point, which we can in Melvin Gordon this week, I have no issues just throwing him in there and figuring out the rest around him.
I couldn't agree more, and that Jacksonville defense should be even worse moving forward. Myles Jack was just placed on IR this morning. I mean, yeah, I'm with you, man. Gordon right now is my front runner for Mr. Chopper on Sunday, but we'll see what happens.
Ooh, chopper pick. All right, well, you don't have to make it the chopper pick, but go ahead and give us your running back tournament play.
Yeah, man, I touched on Mixon. We can go ahead and move along to wide receivers.
Wide receiver, yep.
Yeah, we good. My wide receiver cash game of the week, Calvin Ridley. 6,700. Look, I know he's been priced up a little bit, but he should be, because all he's been when he's been given a decent workload, which has now become an every week occurrence with Mohamed Sanu gone, he's been a top 12 PPR wide receiver. Like, he's had 8 games in his career with at least 8 targets. He's been a top 12 PPR wide receiver 6 times in those games. His worst 2 performances was the PPR wide receiver 13 and the wide receiver 19. Like, I cannot stress enough how good Ridley has been whenever he's just been given opportunities. And, I was talking a little bit earlier about Freeman in this spot. The Panthers, definitely a defense that's better against the run than the pass. But with that said, like, a lot of their good pass defense has been a result of James Bradbury, one of the more underrated cornerbacks in the league. He's made things tough for guys like Julio, Mike Evans over the years, but that's exactly the point. Bradbury is going to be on Julio. This means that we're going to get Ridley on a mix of Ross Cockrell and Donte Jackson. Not terrible guys in their own right, but with that said, again, I truly think Ridley is one of these enhanced receivers that we can go to and trust he's going to win these matchups. The Panthers have allowed the 3rd most yards per game up to number 2 wide receivers this season per Football Outsiders. So, again, that's a better matchup for the run game, but when we have the opportunity, the player talented enough, and the matchup where if we look a little bit closer, I think it's not something we need to really fear. Sign me up.
I do like Calvin Ridley, and I did notice that you ranked him number 10 overall this week. So you are clearly quite high on him, and it makes all the sense in the world, which is more confident than my pick. But you know what, Ian, as you messaged me once I sent you this pick last night, like, what are you thinking? You have to explain this one to me. And it's just because if you are going to play McCaffrey in cash games, and I'm not there just yet. I'm still toying with it. We still need to see what value opens up. But I think a value we may be able to depend on, depending how this all shakes out, is Paris Campbell. Because Paris Campbell now, he's been absent for a month, but he has played 2 games without T.Y. Hilton. And in those 2 games, he was over 60% of the snaps. And I'm not even going to pull it up in the DFS toolkit, by the way, because this is more a human element in my brain working than any projections will show you across the entire industry. So over 60% of the snaps, and then 5 and 8 targets in those 2 contests without T.Y. Hilton. But in this game, remember, not only do we not have T.Y. Hilton, we don't have Eric Ebron. We don't have Chester Rogers. Like, they really need someone outside of Zach Pascal, who in his own right is a terrific play. But if you need the salary, like Campbell's stone minimum on FanDuel, and Campbell's only $200 over the minimum on DraftKings. So I think that's someone you can depend on against a shoddy Bucs defense that people have forgotten is just outright bad. It's been 3 weeks now. But remember, they stumped Drew Brees after that bye because they were partying too hard in Tampa after the week before Peyton's engagement party. And then 2 weeks later, it was that Nick Foles game to where he got benched, 2 fumbles this past week, and then multiple 3-and-outs. So, yeah, I just like going back to Brissett, but more importantly, Campbell, to see 6 to 8 targets if you need the salary relief.
Yeah, I like to call, if anything else, just for the salary relief because there's not really any good. There's not really any good cheap tight ends or quarterbacks this week, so you got to save it somewhere. And Paris Campbell seems about as good a spot. So, okay, my GP wide receiver, who I probably wouldn't fire up in cash games, but I don't hate it. Jamison Crowder at 5,300. And the reason I say I probably wouldn't do cash games is because low-key Crowder's turned into like a boomer-bust wide receiver with Sam Darnold this season. I know we picture him as just a slot maven that gets fed underneath targets all game, but he's had 9 games with Darnold. He's had 5 games where he's been a top 20 PPR wide receiver, 4 games where he's been outside the top 60. Like last week he had 9 targets. He only caught 2 of them. There's definitely a floor here, but I think people have been kind of waiting for him to break out. It's been a couple weeks now where he hasn't done anything. So we're going to get reduced ownership with a guy that we know can get up there and give you that top 20 performance. And only 5,300, I think it makes all the sense in the world against a Dolphins defense that, Crowder went for 8 catches, 83 yards, and a touchdown himself back in week 9. So we also saw the Dolphins, just get railroaded by Jarvis Landry and Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that slot is truly the weakest point of a overall weak defense. And, I'm not the only one here thinking this. One of Nick Menzio's top plays in the start-sit column is Crowder. So I know it's been tough recently, people, but go back to the Crowder well because this is as good of a matchup as we could ask for.
I'm glad you mentioned Crowder because if you don't want to go Crowder, Robbie Anderson's waiting for you there, buddy, because I didn't even know you were going to go Crowder, actually. But I do like Robbie Anderson. We have recency bias affecting us, right? Because Robbie Anderson is coming off a 10-target game, and he did go over 100 yards for the first time in what feels like forever. But the fact is, Robbie Anderson, the past 2 weeks, has become Jamison Crowder in this offense. And that's a reason for tournaments, right, to go to Jamison Crowder, because he's going to catch lower ownership now since he hasn't been great for 2 weeks. But the fact is, Robbie Anderson now in these past 2 weeks, over a 20% target share, has led the team in that span. So I love Robbie Anderson in this particular matchup against the Dolphins, who we've never been worried about their defense anyways. And I know Sam Darnold in particular was shut down in their past matchup, or at least didn't perform up to expectations. But I liked Robbie Anderson and Crowder, and all of them, quite frankly, which is why I also like Fitzpatrick to all be involved.
It's a sneaky shootout game, man. I know it doesn't feel all that, great going to these guys, but you got to respect the price tags in the matchup. All right, going down to the tight end, my cash game tight end of the week, Hunter Henry at 5,100. Talked about some of the things with the Jacksonville defense. And, look, losing Miles Jack hurts the run game, but it might even hurt their secondary more just because of how athletic he is. They literally use him as a middle-of-the-field safety in certain packages, just where he's flying back in kind of that Tampa 2 look. So it was a dud last week for Hunter Henry, only 2 catches, 10 yards. Look, it's a crowded Chargers offense when everyone's healthy. When you got Eckler, Gordon, Mike Williams, Keenan, Henry, one of those guys is probably going to not be great in any given week. But with that said, we've now had about 6 games with Henry back since he returned in week 6, and he joined Travis Kelce and Zach Ertz as only tight ends with at least 50 targets during that span. Only Kelce has more points per reception. So again, we know Henry's really talented. We know he's getting the targets, and he's proven to be plenty productive with it. It's a good matchup with a banged up Jaguars defense. Only 5,100. I think you need to have Henry in cash game lineups.
That's a really good one. He's priced. He's a good price at a median point. For me, though, if you're looking to save salary, I like Ian Thomas quite a bit this week. And he just fills that role that Tyler Higbee, Caden Smith, Jaden Graham, Jesper Horsted on Thanksgiving. He fills that minimum role that he's going to play every single snaps. And in my tight ends, that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for routes, and I'm looking for a guy who's going to be out there every single week. And you look at their starting lineup, without Greg Olsen, who's still in concussion protocol, and we don't think he'll play. We'll see. It's only Thursday. But Ian Thomas, he closed out the last 4 weeks of the season, weeks 13 through 17 last year, with the 6th most receiving yards among all tight ends. He came in for Greg Olsen this past week and had 4 targets in the last 15 minutes, including it was the final play of the third quarter, but let's just say the last 15 minutes. He had 4 targets, right? And so he's going to play every single snap. And this is a guy, a specimen, an athletic specimen, high spark score at the Indy Combine that was poised for a second-year breakout if Greg Olsen wasn't in the way. And Greg Olsen has been one of the heaviest used tight ends in the entire league. Ian Thomas just steps right in and takes that role as a minimum Higbee-like guy who's just minimum salary. Like, it's easy. You lock him in cash games and you forget about it.
All right, now my GPP tight end is maybe my least confident play of any of these.
You set it up slowly, so that means I knew you were shaky to get it started.
Oh, man. It's Jonah Smith. It's Jonah Smith at 3,100. And Jonah Smith, if you're paying attention to box scores, does not have a catch in 2 straight weeks,
right,
which is not good because Delaney Walker's been out. With that said, his snap rate's 94%, 87%. He has been an every down player and just an extremely run-heavy offense. I mean, look, Tannehill has been playing incredible this year. Only Kirk Cousins, I believe, is averaging more adjusted yards per attempt than Tannehill. He's being incredibly efficient on like 20 to 25 passes per game. So, again, there's a very low floor here, 3,100. I'm a little more willing to take a chance on it because of the matchup. I mean, Raiders defense, one of them just like kind of the worst secondaries overall in the league, and that definitely has included the tight end position. They're one of only 7 defenses to allow at least 60 receiving yards per game to opposing tight ends. Again, I like the Ian Thomas call, but I think other than him and Jonah, there's just not that many cheap, viable tight ends this week. So if you're not trying, if you want to take a chance on Paris Campbell, that's fine. If you want to take a chance on Ian Thomas, go for it. But I think you got to try to find some upside in that low 3K range at some position. And we've seen Jonah make the most of his limited targets in the past. Hasn't been recently, but I still do think he's a very talented player that just hasn't quite gotten the targets he needs. Will it happen this week? Potentially not. That's why I put him in GPP lineups. Please don't put him anywhere near a cash lineup. But the upside is there for a cheap price.
Whether you want to use this next guy in tournaments or cash, I think it's fine. He was a strong cash game option last week if you were not going Higbee at minimum price, which is, like I said, which I typically look for, just the stone minimum guys. But Jack Doyle in tournaments, in cash games this week, the role hasn't changed, right? It is Jack Doyle playing every single snap again like he did last week in place of Eric Ebron. Jack Doyle ran a season high in routes. Jack Doyle played a season high in snaps, and he had a season high in targets. Like, this is just another game without Ebron again, and with T.Y. Hilton still out, that Jack Doyle will just continue to be on the field for every down. And this is a bad Bucs defense against tight ends. Like, they're still top 3 in fantasy points per game allowed to tight ends. We just tend to over-focus on the Cardinals defense because the Cardinals don't even try to cover tight ends whatsoever. So Jack Doyle, a top 8 option in season long, if not top 6, honestly, and one of the safest plays on the board, even for his salary, which is not as high as George Kittle's and whatnot, but even for his middle salary, it's well worth paying for because you know what you're getting.
Absolutely. And real quick, I'll touch on just a few defenses. I don't see any defenses this week that you necessarily need to have. I mean, it seems like one of those weeks where a random squad that gets a fumble recovery for a score or pick 6 could end up being the people to own on the slate. With that said, I think the Colts at 2,400 against the Buccaneers are pretty enticing. They have their defense with some talent at all 3 levels. They haven't been an elite unit by any stretch this season, but they've gotten a little bit healthier recently. Lord knows we've all seen Jameis make plenty of mistakes this year. I mean, leads the league in interceptions. So if you're looking for a defense that does have the potential to get one of those, pick 6s, find the end zone on their own, I think if you can get the team playing Jameis Winston, you're looking at your best shot. And then also if you do feel like paying up, which I know it's tough and you don't want to do it on defense, but the Vikings at 3,800, I mean, look, being home on Thanksgiving against the Bears is one thing, but going on the road and facing Minnesota is a completely other thing for David Blow. So, I was happy to see how he played. I mean, he wasn't awful. But with that said, they didn't really change the offense all that much. I mean, he was still he had a deep ball rate of about 13%, still trying to take chances downfield. Hey, it worked out for him once, but, I mean, we watched that game. We saw that Kenny Galladay 70-yard touchdown. There was no one within 30 yards of him. I would like to see what David Blow can do in a tougher road environment against a more sound defense because I think it could blow up. No pun intended.
Definitely pun intended. He can blow. He can blow up. And like you said, he did have 5 shots, 20-plus yards downfield. He was good, but even Vegas, Vikings are 13-point favorites, which is why Madison I kind of like as a tournament play, if only because you can go overweight on the field if Dalvin Cook's healthy, because there's still a tremendous chance that Madison gets an extreme high amount of run because they can just get a lead and then let Cook rest the rest of the game. So I still like Madison even if Cook plays in season long and DFS. But quickly, rather than build a lineup because there's so much going on in front of me. You have no idea. Let's go ahead and I just want to touch on a couple of our favorite game stacks. So, for instance, mine, we've talked about both of these players, but I like Ryan Fitzpatrick, Devontae Parker, or if you want to get a little more contrarian, Ryan Fitzpatrick to Gesicki, since Jamal Adams was in charge of covering tight ends initially, and then run it back with Robbie Anderson, or as you said, you like Jamison Crowder. Is there any other games in particular that you are looking at this week that you are excited to run back?
I mentioned the Colts defense. I kind of like that game a little bit as a whole. I don't think we talked about any of the individual players too much, but Chris Godwin and Mike Evans dudded last week, and I know it's been rare since we've seen them go off together, but in weeks 4 and 6, like they were both top 10 PPR wide receivers, so it's rare, but it happens, and they're both coming off duds, so I don't mind going like Evans, Godwin, and then turning it back with Zach Pascal or Jack Doyle, like you mentioned earlier. So I think that Buccaneers-Indy game, it's a little bit slow-paced. I know it's not the sexiest matchup, but there are still good players on both sides of the ball that, I could see putting up some boom performances.
And as you see on the Rotoworld DFS toolkit, like that's a good weather game as well. 74 degrees, wind single digits. So yeah, I like that one a lot. And then again, I'm still not really scared of the 49ers defense if you're looking to stack sneakily that game. And I would run it back if you're playing Breeze and or just going Thomas and Kamara. I would run it back with Emmanuel Sanders, who quietly played a Niners high. So he's been with the Niners for 5 games now, played a Niners high 98% of their snaps since he joined the team. And 40% of the snaps so far have come in the slot since he's joined San Francisco. And obviously, the Saints have allowed the second most slot receptions to opposing wideouts. So I think Sanders is a sneaky DFS tournament play as well. And getting tournament exposure indoors is always a good way to go. But
yeah, I like the Sanders call. I mean, Lattimore usually doesn't move into the slot if he does happen to catch that matchup. And instead, I mean, look, Debo is awesome, but his big games have really come with Sanders' sideline. I mean, when Sanders has been out there and healthy and playing a full-time snap role, he's usually finished 1 or 2, with Kittle as the top receivers in that offense.
Ian, that's going to do it. Thanks for joining me as you are boots on the ground at Soldier Field. We will be back next week to take some more of your questions and talk Week 15, or hopefully we have more values, and hopefully there isn't a fire burning in front of me. So for that, I'm John Daigle. He is Ian Hartitz. We'll see you next week probably.